In the previous video, Dr. Tomlinson began an examination of what differentiated instructional strategies look like when applied to teaching reading and writing. In this video, Dr. Tomlinson shows how ongoing assessment strategies can be used to make literacy instruction fit the needs of each of our students. As you will learn, effective assessment is an ongoing part of the differentiation process that takes place before, during, and after instruction. And now, Dr. Tomlinson.
Okay, let's move to a third principle, which we're going to look at quickly because Rick helped us do that for a minute. That is the role of assessment in a differentiated classroom. We really, if we're going to get to know kids, if we're going to connect with them, if we're going to make things relevant for them and rigorous, if we're going to make engagement happen, if we want them to understand, we have to know who they are and where they're coming from. And that means that somehow we need to figure out what their readiness levels are. How much stuff do they know? Do they have a lot of information, or are they kind of information poor? Do they know about the amount of information we'd expect from a kid this age? How are their skills? It's very possible that a kid can know a lot and not be able to write a lot. There are a lot of kids with learning disabilities who are very good content-wise, but their skills are weak because they're influenced by the learning disability that they have. And how about their understandings? Do they really understand big ideas that we'd like them to have, or do they have some pretty important misunderstandings that we need to know about? And what do they care about? What is it that gets a kid really excited? Like the person talking about the little guy with the comic book thing. That's what turns him on, and that's the gateway to snagging him on some other stuff. What is it that the kid really cares about? And how does this student learn? Is it a student who learns in Sternberg's terms better analytically, creatively, or practically? Is this a kid who learns better alone, or is it a kid who learns better with a partner to work with? Is this a kid who really can't tolerate any noise and movement in the classroom, or is this a kid who needs some noise in the classroom to be able to work? So how does the child learn? If we were consistently assessing all three of these things, we'd be getting to know kids better and better and better throughout a 9-month period. This is sort of the what we need to assess. When is also ongoing. We should do pre-assessments, and you saw Rick do that with his 3 questions. I have my KUDs, my learning goal, before my unit begins. I need to know where you are at the outset of this journey. That's what a pre-assessment's for. Now, day by day or every couple of days, we've been working on this piece of the puzzle. I want to check to see how you are with this piece of the puzzle. Now we're going to go on and work with the next piece of the puzzle. But if I had somebody who was behind with the first piece, I want to build in something to do about that. And if I have somebody who's ahead, I want to work with that. So throughout the process, formative assessments keep saying, okay, they're here, they're with me, they're not with me, somebody just went off on a left turn. I used to travel with my students a lot. And when I would go on trips with them, especially if I took them to New York City, I literally would wake up for nights afterwards counting in my sleep. And the reason I was counting is the notion of losing a couple of those little gems in the very crowded streets of Manhattan did not seem smart to me. And so I would count them 50 times a day. And of course they're wiggling all the time, you know, so you can't be sure if you counted 1 3 times or whatever. Truly, when I counted a couple of times, I actually ended up with a larger number than I was supposed to have. And twice, it was because someone who either was very interesting or not quite tuned into the world as you might want it to be, had joined the group because I was giving out bus fare. And they wanted the bus fare, so they just got in the line. And made themselves a part of the group. And suddenly I had more than I needed to have. I needed to know that because I had strange men who were hanging around young adolescents, and it was good to know they were there. On the other hand, I've counted a couple of times where I couldn't get as many students as I needed to, and I had actually lost some. And if I hadn't counted, we could have had some really serious problems. That's what ongoing assessment is. I've got my group. Where are they? Have I lost somebody? Has somebody gotten ahead of me? Has somebody stopped to look in a store window and we're about to pass them by? It's that same notion of needing to keep track. It's bad to lose them. It's really bad to lose them. This is what many of us think of assessment as, is just that midterm, the test, the graded thing that goes in the grade book to say to parents, see, I was watching. But it's summative. It comes at the end of a big hunk and it counts for a grade. The experts tell us, of course, that pre-assessment should never be graded because we haven't taught the stuff yet. It's not fair to expect the kids to know it. But the experts also tell us, and this will make you a little crazy, especially if you're a middle or high school teacher, formative assessment should not be graded. They're practice, and they're to let us and the kids know where they are. So a lot of assessment, according to the assessment experts, and certainly in differentiation, is just to help us know, just to help the kids know what's going on, where they are, what's working, what they can do better next, what we can do better next. A couple of examples of pre-assessments. Rick showed you one. This is one that I kind of like for an early in the year piece, just kind of getting to know who kids are. And I like the way the people who developed this one talk about it. What's a positive thing people say about you? When you feel great at school, what probably caused it? What's a dream you have for yourself? What do you like to spend time on? What's something that really grabs your imagination? What's something cool about your family? What's a strength you have? What can you contribute to the classroom? What's something you wish people knew about you that they probably don't? And what's something that you're proud of? The people who developed this called it a strength-based assessment. And what I like about this is really when they started talking about that form, because what they said is too often in school, we use assessments that tell us something like this. This kid has an average IQ, is just about on grade level for reading, is a little above grade level in math computation, missed 10 days of school this quarter, and was in school suspension twice last semester. Are you excited about teaching that kid? How does he sound to you? If you got 30 of him coming, what do you think? Sounds flat to me. It sounds like the page of a phone book. I finally got to the point where I wanted to see each of them clean. I wanted to see each of them with full possibilities. And when I start looking at, okay, this kid was in school suspension 4 times. Oops, here's a kid who's a little below grade level in reading. Sometimes it was hard for me to realize that the kid was below grade level in reading because he had a learning disability and was sharp as a tack, but just couldn't do the decoding piece. Or with adolescents, I've seen kids who scored poorly on standardized tests because life was collapsing around them, or they just had a growth spurt after that, or it was just a lousy one of those plateau times in their year. And by the next year, they looked like somebody completely different. So for me, I got to the place where doing some stuff like this and also doing a quick and dirty pre-assessment for myself. I would give kids a piece of text to read out of my textbook and ask them a comprehension question. And I could look at those answers and really tell who can understand the text, who can't understand, who's sort of moderate. I'd read something to them orally and ask them a comprehension question. And some of the kids who couldn't read the stuff and understand could listen and understand, or vice versa. I would do sort of a vocabulary survey of vocabulary I thought was important, not something that came from a random standardized test. And most of the time, I found that plus something like this gave me a more current picture, and also, I guess for me, a more enthusiastic picture than those numbers. Where I tended to go back to the numbers was if I couldn't figure a kid out, and I just couldn't get a handle on things. Sometimes looking at those cumulative folders helped me see a pattern I couldn't see. But I finally got to the place, maybe partly in service of a fluid mindset, of saying, let me just find out where kids are in regard to important stuff and let's move on, rather than looking at numbers that might tend to help sway me in a direction I don't want to go. By contrast, a strength-based assessment, in other words, something like this, Might help you see this is a kid who likes mechanical things, likes to read about motorcycles, wants to learn about computers, is kind of seen as a big brother to kids in the neighborhood, likes to talk about ideas and wants to travel. Now I know cool stuff to do with this kid. I see a three-dimensional person that I can connect with, that I might really want to invest in, and so that's sort of the benefit of something like this potentially. Here's a great little reading inventory for the beginning of the year. Take a look at it for a second. What would you do if a kid said, I'm not very good in reading, never really have been too good, nobody at my house reads much, I think reading's kind of boring. When I get to something I can't read, I just skip it. What I do in the afternoon never involves reading. I play sports or I watch TV, but I never read. What do you want to do when you get a thing like that back from a kid?
Find out why.
I think that would sure help. Yeah, what experience was it that made you feel that way in school? What else do you want to do?
I bet that kid is reading and doesn't even know that he's reading. Because typically in school, reading is about textbooks and handouts, but when he goes home, he may be reading a sports magazine. My students have learning disabilities, and they can read those little stats, those little sports stats. I don't understand them at the back of the newspaper. They're just numbers, and they understand those things. So that's reading, and they don't even know that they're doing it. So I would try and make a connection between that and school.
Yeah, most kids read something, even if it's just the TV guide. But most of them will read something on the internet or sports equipment or whatever, and we're going to look at some kids like that in a minute. So what you're sort of saying is, I just don't believe I want to accept that you don't read it all. I just want to find out what you do read, and we're going to kind of go from there. That reminds me again of sort of the fluid mindset. I want to see this kid as a reader, and I want to do some stuff in this class to help this kid see that he does read, or that she does read, or that she can read, or that this has possibilities she hasn't seen. I don't want to look at it and say, oh gosh, here comes another kid I can't teach, but here's a kid I need to turn around. I need to help this kid quit believing that he can't do and start believing that he can. Similarly, when I get a kid who says, I read anything, I've never had any problem with reading, I want to try to find a way to help that kid have to exert some effort, because I want the student to be a growing reader, not one who just sort of coasts. Some examples of ongoing assessment. This thing is called a Frayer diagram, F-R-A-Y-E-R. And it's a great thing to use, by the way, as a pre-assessment as well as an ongoing assessment. But you just put here in the center whatever the topic or the concept is that you're getting ready to study, and you ask kids to tell you what their definition is, any information they know, examples of the thing, and non-examples, which means something that's close but not quite right. And if you do this as a pre-assessment, and then teach for a while and let kids have a chance to do some learning, and then use it as an ongoing assessment, you can see where the growth is, and so can the kids. So it's a handy little mechanism. Again, just like Rick's pre-assessment, they don't have to be long and complicated, just sort of to the point. If you had watched Rick a little bit longer, you would see that he uses exit cards really often when his students leave the class at the end of the day. And he'll ask them on that exit card to apply something or relate something to their own lives or ask questions about something that they've studied. And by looking at those exit cards, which the kids fill out in just a couple of minutes, he can sort of tell who really understood where we were today, who's raising questions that would be interesting for us to pursue that I hadn't even considered yet, who really seems to be misunderstanding something. It's possible much of the time to stand at the door and collect those exit cards, and we actually have seen examples of teachers who can stand at the door and scan them and put kids who seem to be understanding on the top of the stack of cards and kids who don't seem to be in the bottom, and by the time the kids have left the room, you've actually got them sorted to kids who are in pretty good shape and kids who need a little bit of support. Or you could put them between three fingers again, you know, kids who have it nailed with articulate language and kids who are in pretty good shape and kids that need to spend a little more time on it. Here's an example of a teacher using an exit card to check not on the content, but how the class is working for the kid. And so she said, guys, this week we've used 3-minute pauses, think, pair, share, and visualizing to help you work with what we've been reading. Please let me know which of those 3 things seems to be working best for you and why. And once again, this helps the kid understand what the teacher's up to and be much more self-aware, much more reflective and metacognitive, which is really helpful. This is the kind of exit card that Rick uses a little bit later in the video that you watched just a minute of. It's a 3-2-1 card, and the 3, the 2, and the 1 can be anything you want it to be. But what are 3 things that you learned from your book talk today? What are 2 questions you still have about your book? And what's one way that you can connect the book with some experience that you've had? Again, by looking at that, you've made the kid more aware, but you're also much more aware of where the student's coming from. And this is a 3-2-1 card, except the teacher turned it around to make it a 1-2-3 card. And here what she's checking with the kids on is a piece of work that they're doing, an essay that they're writing or a story. So after reading over my rough draft, one thing I really like about it is 2 resources I can use to make it better are, and 3 revisions I can make to improve it are. This again helps the teacher see if the kid's plugged in realistically, helps the kid reflect a little bit more on where they're going. And then I want to show you one example that I think is kind of cute about how assessment can work, particularly in regard to literacy. It's a teacher of first graders, and early in the year they were having a heck of a thunderstorm outside, and the kids couldn't go out to recess because the ground was all soggy. So she created a little story sheet for them, and all it had on it was these clouds and the thing at the bottom that says, "When it rains, I like to." And she asked the kids to say what they like to do when it rains and then draw a picture of it. And I want to show you 3 little kiddos from the class. I don't know if you can see this, but this is a kid. This is a little boy right here. And this is his mud puddle. And he says, "When it rains, I like to." He can't write. So what he did was he drew his answer. "When it rains, I like to." And when she came to him for dictation, he said, "When it rains, I like to jump in the puddles." But he was telling his jumping in the puddles thing, you know, with his lines. She didn't just say, "Okay, that's nice, take it home and put it on the refrigerator." She's going to look at it and say, sort of, where is he? He's aware of stories. He knows what he wants to say. He's got a pretty good story in his head. He just doesn't have the words for it. I mean, the writing. This little kid says, "When it rains, I like to waste my TV, like to watch my TV." It's a child who's further down the pike with invented spelling, but still working in that direction. Here's a little guy who says, "When it rains, I like to play board games," which I've always thought was an appropriate sentence. If you've been inside with Monopoly for 5 days or something, "It rains, I like to play board games." And then there's this little kid who said, "I'm sorry, that's a stupid diagram. It doesn't have enough space on it for me to write." And so she says, "My journal by Emily B. I have a journal. I like to write. I like to draw. I like it. It is fun. After all, the more the merrier." Now, when you're that teacher and you're working in a differentiated classroom, you don't say, "Well, gee whiz, look at this and look at this. They're pretty much the same kid. I guess we'll all do the same thing tomorrow during writing time." So this little girl, the next day when they got ready to do a variety of tasks, it wasn't that everybody but one kid was doing the same thing, but she said to this little kid, "How'd you like to write a poem today?" And she said, yeah, she thought that'd be pretty good. So the teacher plugged her into the computer, and this is what she wrote. I found a little bear, I put him in my chair, I fed him soup and rice, he said it's mighty nice. Just an example of a teacher saying, let me see where you need to go next. I don't think this would have been a particularly helpful assignment for the little kid who's doing this. Right now he needs to work with something else. But she doesn't probably need to know this is Mr. B or this is, the simplest of the words. High school teacher's example. I was in California for a conference a couple of springs ago, and a woman I've never met came to me and she said, I just have to tell you something. And I said, okay. And she said, I don't know why I need to tell you this because it's really embarrassing, but I just have to tell you. And she said last year, she'd probably been teaching 20 or 25 years. She said last year, I was teaching a unit at the outset of the year on the agricultural revolution. And it was her first unit in the year with the kids. And so she's kind of going slowly like we do so the kids would know what she expects for homework and how to do their notebooks and where to put stuff in the room and how to get into groups and work. And so it was moving along. She felt like it had been going on a long time. And they had done reading and some lectures and some videos all about the agricultural revolution, but also all about the procedures in the classroom. So about 3 weeks into the unit, she's talking to the kids one morning, and this guy raises his hand right smack in the middle of what she's saying. And so she stopped to call on him, and he says, so, what's agriculture? He'd spent 3 weeks on the agricultural revolution, and he had no idea what the word meant. How do you suppose you'd have felt? We've got two choices. Sometimes you just want to, your poorer instincts take over and you want to think, well, where have you been, stupid? But she had the better one. She had the better instinct, her noble side won. And she said, I really thought my knees were going to buckle. And I thought to myself, you have been teaching this child for 3 weeks and never even checked to see if he understood the most fundamental concept that you were teaching. And she said, then the second thing that hit me immediately after that was how many times have I done that to other kids? How many times have I just kept going, assuming that they all knew stuff that surely anybody's known for 10 years, and they didn't. And she said, my third thought was, any minute somebody's going to come in this room and arrest me for educational malpractice. And she said, I just wanted to tell you that I will never, ever start a unit again without a pre-assessment. And I thought, again, that was a teacher who's trying to be reflective and grow and see in herself the potential to make things better rather than getting irked with the kid who, surely my high school has to know what agriculture is, for heaven's sakes. But she's saying the same thing that the teacher with the little guy with the mud puddles is. If I see where they are when we start, I know much better what to do. Hilda Taba says, teaching in the dark is questionable business. And I think it's probably really the case in differentiation that teaching without ongoing assessment is a misunderstanding of differentiation. It's just a folly. Lorna Earle, who's a Canadian educator, said probably my favorite definition of differentiation. She says, guys, let me tell you what this differentiation thing is, and I really hope you guys are seeing this from what we've tried to share with you. She says, here's all differentiation is. Do you have your learning goals? Are they really clear? Do you know the KUDs? Step one. Step two, are you checking constantly to see who's where related to those KUDs? And if you do that, if you use pre-assessment and ongoing assessment, you're going to find that much of the time those kids are all over the place related to those goals. And once you find that out, she says, differentiation is not some extra thing, it's the next logical step. So having clear KUDs, constantly checking to see where kids are related to those in terms of readiness, interest, and learning profile is what propels us forward with differentiation. So what's different with differentiation and assessment? Much of the time, assessment is about judging kids. Teachers will often say to me, could you talk to us about assessment and differentiation? And I've learned to ask, could you tell me what you mean about assessment? And what do you suppose the most common answer is?
How do you grade them?
Grades, yeah. Assessment and grading are two different things. And assessment, grading is about judging. Assessment is about figuring out, knowing where kids are. With differentiation, grading is not about filling grade books. Assessment is not about filling grade books. Teachers who are really working with the premises of differentiation don't grade all those formative things. So you don't any longer believe you're a better teacher if you have 21 grades than if you have 4 or 6 solid ones in there. It's about informing instruction, much more than about filling grade books. It's about before, during, and after instruction, not just after. And it's about teaching for success, not gotcha teaching. I won't ask you to raise your hands, but is there anyone in here, and this might be more nearly true for secondary folks than for elementary ones, but anybody in here who has ever yourself or known somebody who said ooh, let me put that fiendishly difficult thing on the test. Let me put that weird little piece of information on there, and I'll see if I can get them. And even those 2 or 3 smartest kids, they won't find that footnote. And then when they get that test, they'll miss that part, and I can sort of say, see, I gotcha. It's like a game, and I gotcha, you missed it. I did that when I was a new teacher. I really thought that's what you were supposed to do, and the reason is because that's what was done to me for years. And these picky little things on the test, weird little esoteric kinds of things that you throw in just to see if somebody got it. Teaching for success does not mean teaching the test. It means teaching the stuff thoroughly enough and clearly enough so that when you give the kids something to do with it, they really can manipulate it and own it and use it. And so that's sort of the hope with this. You have had a chance in a number of workshops through the previous 2 days to hear folks illustrating assessment and differentiation. What questions do you have about the use of it, how it would work, your time in regard to it? Yeah.
I'm a late processor, so this is going back a few slides, but I understand totally the pre-assessment would not be graded, that's for teacher knowledge. But where I work, the reality is you have to have 2 grades per content area in that grade book, subject to inspection by the grade police at any time. And I understand the formative assessment, I understand its role, but the suggestion was, that really shouldn't be graded, that really we should just be grading at that end point. And I guess my concern is if during the formative assessment period the kids are doing well on something, I would want to include that in their grades because I would hate for it all to 3 or 4 weeks later come down to that 1 unit test. And then I feel like that's no better than the high stakes testing that they're taking all the time.
Yeah.
So
let me clarify that. Yeah, let me clarify that a little bit. A summative assessment does not just have to be the end of the unit test. You can say to yourself, okay, now for the last couple of weeks, we've been working on these 2 ideas and these skills, and I think we're about ready to wrap that up. So I'm going to give the kids a test that will count, or an application, or an authentic assessment, or something on that chunk. Meantime, you might have had 5 other just sort of practice things for kids to do before that. What the experts would say is that the summative assessments, depending on the age of the kids and the length of your marking period, might happen 3 or 4 times in there. And when you get to the end of the unit one, the experts on summative assessment would say one piece ought not to tell us the whole story. So maybe you do feel the need to give them some kind of a test, but maybe there's some sort of an application you can give them as well. And so they've had 2 ways to show you, or maybe they've been keeping a journal or a blog all the way through the unit, and at the end that comes in to sort of wrap up what they're doing. Nobody would ever say it's a great idea or an acceptable idea to have 1 grade in a grade book and say this is it for you, honey. So what you're looking is sort of benchmarky kinds of things through. When Jay McTighe and his crew work with Understanding by Design in section 2 of what they're doing, part 2 of the template, they suggest that you lay out the summative assessments for the whole unit as soon as you've set your learning goals so they're tightly aligned. And typically in a unit, they'll have 4 or 5 summative, 6 maybe summative pieces. But still all that daily stuff, all those things you practice just time after time, that's what you're really hoping is just practice and doesn't have to always hang over the kid's head for something. Other questions? That's a great one because that really hangs us up. I'll tell you what'll finish making you crazy for those of you who are high school folks. Where do you suppose homework falls? Graded or not? Yeah. All the experts say don't grade that. That doesn't mean don't check it. It doesn't mean don't give them feedback. It means you're sending them home theoretically without help. Realistically, some do, some don't have help. If they don't have help and they can't understand it and you're going to grade them on it, it just becomes more and more discouraging. A lot of bright kids end up refusing to do homework because it's so pointless to them. And then we say, oh, well, you made a 98 on the test, but you didn't do your homework, so you have a C- in the class, when in fact the summative assessment was supposed to tell us what they know, understand, and can do, and that practice was just to get them there, and the message was the practice was not helpful. We just get tied up in so many things like that. Yeah, it's a vicious circle. What the experts tell us in assessment and grading, and I'm not an expert in that, I just read their stuff and try to learn from it and make sure I'm on a path that's sound. And what they tell us is that if we got it right, our grades, we'd be giving 3 grades, not 1. You can't do this on your report card this marking period because they're not made that way. Ken O'Connor finds more schools moving in this direction, but you can still do this through emails home or notes on your report cards or attachments you put on or conversations with parents. The trajectory of thinking ought to be, Grant Wiggins calls it 3P grading. The first one is the product, and that is, given the standards that you have, where is that child? Nothing else but that. Given what the knows, understands, and do's were, where is that kid? Doesn't have anything in there for being nice or for being tardy or for not putting your name on the right line or not doing your homework. It's just on those summative pieces, where is this kid? It ought to be unambiguously clear where the kid's status is just with that stuff. That's product. The second one is process. How are you working? And Wiggins calls that habits of mind and work. He doesn't call it effort, and the reason for that is you and I can't see effort. Effort is invisible. I can have kids that make me think they're sweating bullets and they're doing nothing, and I have other Joe Cools who, oh, I don't study, I don't do anything, and behind the scenes they're pedaling as fast as they can. What I can see is, do you come ask for help when you need it? I can see that you revise when somebody gives you suggestions. I can see that you plan out a timeline and you try to stick with it. I see that you're willing to try something again when it doesn't work the first time, that you persist in the face of difficulty. Those are the habits of mind of successful people. And so we want to encourage that with kids. So Wiggins says give them a product grade, give them a process grade. It's observable, it's measurable. And then the third one is give them a progress grade. Given where you started in these areas, how much have you grown? And here's the piece Wiggins says that we miss, and I think he's right, either that or again, I'm the only bumpkin in the world because I missed this for a long time. The message ought to be, if your process is good and keep getting better, your progress will continue. If your progress continues, you will achieve the product. It's almost the sort of grade manifestation of fluid mindset. I want to teach you how to work well. I want to insist that you grow, and we're going to do that until we get to where you're going. And so Wiggins would say if you only have one space on your report card, it has to be the product. Has to be the product. Here, if you're writing and you're not listening, hear this one piece from me. Never average those 3. Never say I've only got one box, so I'll put process, product, and progress together, because that makes the grade have no meaning whatsoever. What you have to do is put down the product, if that's all you've got, and then on an attachment to the report card, a note that you put, a computer thing, parent-student conferences, whatever you've got, say what I really want you to know is we value 3 things. How well is your child working? How much like an expert is he or she working? How much growth can we see? And how is the product? And they feed each other. And parents that's where a fluid mindset comes from, understanding that and seeing it at work. So that's a great question, and one that bothers people a good deal. Your questions have been great. I really appreciate your good thinking.
In the next video, Dr. Tomlinson will look more closely at our diverse student population and explain how differentiated literacy instruction can be used to meet students' varying readiness levels, learning profiles, and personal interests.